times with the newer authors, newer illustrators, newer pop-up book manufacturers. You never know if it's a trend or a one-off.
You just don't know which of these folks are really going to have legs, are going to be around and contributing in a significant way for decades. You're right. It's really easy to look backwards and pick out the top of the crop, but to look forward is a little bit more difficult.
Good morning, Lee.
Good morning, Ed. Good morning, Larry. How are y'all today?
A-okay, and getting better by the minute. The countdown has begun.
Yes. Forgot these.
Lee, you don't have a segment this week. This has been a while since you haven't been the star of the show.
Oh.
There she is.
And putting in audio.
Lee, I was saying you don't have a segment this week. It's been a while since you haven't been on live.
No, I don't. But
it felt good, huh?
Yeah, I did. I've been busy. Our book club is having our first meeting tomorrow night in 15 months.
Woo-hoo.
There are only going to be 8 of us out of about 15. We've all been vaccinated that are coming. We're not reading a book. We're going to talk about what we've read in the last 15 months and see where to go from here. Mostly we're going to eat and drink. That's, and these are people that I've seen with some regularity, but as a group, we have not spent time together. It's going to be at my house, and so it's exciting. It's going to be fun. We are an older group. Our ages range from early 70s to late 80s. And people are having some health problems, and we're just kind of having to deal with it. But on the whole, it's a very active group who stay very involved in not just living, but in volunteer work and stuff like that. So it should be a nice evening.
Have you identified a book, or are you going to pick one out tomorrow?
We're going to pick it out tomorrow. We had a couple of books lined up when the pandemic broke, but one of them we decided we didn't like, so we're not going to read it. And the other one was, Bob always thought that we needed to kind of alternate with modern stuff with older stuff, and he had recommended that we read something by George Eliot, and we're not real sure that anybody in the group can, with Bob gone, anybody in the group can lead that discussion very well. So, things are going to change with the book club, I'm afraid, because it was kind of his baby, and we'll just see. We'll just see. I asked to have the first one, and partly because I've done all this renovation at the house. They haven't seen it. So, and the weather looks like it's nice, so we may sit on the deck. We've had 90 degrees and over this week, but today's very pleasant. And we had a little rain last night, and we're hoping for nice weather tomorrow. So we'll see. But it's a kind of a fairly important step for this little group. We've been together for a long time, and
book clubs are wonderful.
They are. One of our members keeps a list of what we've read, and it's amazing how, because we've had new people come in and over the years, and it's amazing how somebody will suggest something and Janice will hop up and say, "I'm sorry, but we read that." So
back in 1997.
Oh yeah, at least. So it's going to be a nice evening. We're looking forward to it. And I worked my last day at the Art Center Thursday.
Not forever.
Well, not till, they're doing a search for the new director right now, and I'm available to go in and continue with some of the things I've been doing until someone is hired to do what I've been doing, which is busy work, membership and stuff like that. So
Well,
we'll
our
see.
art museum, the Portland Art Museum, opened up with a fabulous Ansel Adams exhibit.
Ooh.
Oh, wow.
And on the first floor, then the second floor are more modern photographers, and I am just overwhelmed with some of the techniques that these modern photographers have come up with to lay photos on top of
Yeah.
each other and to
Mhm.
make three-dimensional photos. That just like we were talking about children's book illustrators, Larry. The next generation is just becoming so
Is
creative
astounding.
digitally.
Right.
Yeah. Yeah.
You know, it is interesting. I mean, within the children's book world, there used to be a thing. I mean, just for us, there used to be a thing, obviously, with collecting first editions. And why in the children's book world? Because I could show you the difference between a first printing and a printing that was done 4 years later, and the illustrations have completely muddied, and the color tone is off, and everything is just miserable. But for the modern people now who are working digitally and creating illustrations digitally, it will make absolutely no difference between a first edition and a 7,000th edition. It's going to be exactly the same. Nothing will deteriorate. And it's the same sort of thing. It's these new techniques that are becoming available for contemporary illustrators, photographers, and anybody in the arts, I would imagine, who are taking advantage of these, that it's changing the world.
That's true. I read recently, I think it was 2017, as of 2017 and forward, more photos are taken every year that were taken in the entire 20th century.
Yep.
And it still amazes me that that I can reproduce a photo and it will still look like it did when I first took it, instead of from this negative that's been sitting around for all these years, or looking at these faded prints, from 40 years ago and things like that. It is amazing. One of our exhibits at the Art Center here right now is works by board members, and a lot of it is photography, and some of that is really amazing in the special effects that they have gotten. And we also have an exhibit of posters from the Smithsonian, one group on women's suffrage and one group on women inventors.
Wow.
And those are neat.
Broadsides are very hot right now. Broadsides are moving. Yeah, maybe our guests later in the show may want to share something with us about that from the Ephemera Society.
Yeah, so those have been, we're not getting a lot of traffic yet, but we've had 2 live events and have children's workshops scheduled for the summer and some music things scheduled, and things will pick up. The new director is going to be key to what happens there.
And how close are you to finding the new director?
Well, they hope to have someone by mid-July. Our director passed away.
Yeah.
And so there wasn't really a contingency plan in place because nobody was doing anything. The center wasn't open for months, but they have about 13 applicants, and the latest I've heard is that maybe 3 of them are really good prospects.
That's great. And
but you're talking about a job that doesn't pay that well and doesn't have benefits and requires nights and weekends, and it's hard. It's hard. So we'll see, but they're hoping by mid-July to have someone in place. And we have a good program director who's staying, so that's good. That's who I've been working under.
Yeah.
But you could not have paid me enough to apply for that job. I'll tell you.
I'm on Instagram, and there are really only 2 things I follow on Instagram. One is books, and the other is art. And it's such a great tool. I did a lot of social media. It can be, claptrap type of stuff. But if you try and narrow the scope of what interests you, there are just some wonderful people out there posting book material and original art material. Yeah. I think it's a great, fun, enjoyable thing to look at.
Yeah, I follow a good bit of folk art kind of stuff. My son will send me links and say, you need to look at this. Usually meaning this is a friend of mine and you need to buy a piece of his art. But, that's okay too.
Righto.
That's okay.
And I just want to confirm, just so that I can get myself ready. I'm going to be on first today.
You're going to be on first in 26 seconds, Larry.
And counting.
Okay. Well, a minute or
wanted
two.
to
I'll
make
do
sure.
a quick introduction here. Yeah, you're on first,
Sure.
and then we've got Dick Schiefon, who's the president of the Ephemera Society of America.
That's exciting.
Yeah, I had a little chat with him earlier this morning. I went to get coffee this morning, and every Saturday the young lady behind the counter says, "Who's going to be on your show today?" We're going to have Dick Schief, and he's going to talk about typography and fonts. And she says, "Well, I want to know why when I was in college, I always had to use 11-point Times Roman. What was up with that?" Well, I don't think that's what Dick was going to talk about, but I'll make sure I'll ask him.
Good.
Yeah.
Good morning, everybody. Larry Rakow, greetings. Lee Lynn, hello. And all of our audience and those of you who are listening in throughout the week, welcome to the Rare Book Cafe, the book lovers' rendezvous, where the topics are priceless and the conversation is free. Larry, what are you going to be sharing with us today?
Well, I thought a couple of things today, but mostly, as a children's book collector and dealer, it always both surprises and delights me when any children's book topic makes the national or international news. And not too long ago, just a couple of months ago, Dr. Seuss Enterprises, the folks that go and handle the estate of Dr. Seuss, as most of our listeners must remember, decided that they were not going to continue issuing 6 of Dr. Seuss's titles. And I thought we might delve a little bit deeper into that. Take a look, actually, at some of the illustrations that caused concern and talk just a little bit of politics about why this was done and the public's reaction to it.
Okay, looking forward to it. And Lee, this is the first week in a while you haven't been on live sharing a segment. Does it feel good to have a week off?
Well, it's kind of nice, but I may have a few questions for Larry, so I'll try to participate.
Okay, stick around. And Lee, I got one for you. The name of your business is Ridge Books. Are you in the Dahlonega Mountains of Georgia? What ridge are you on?
Well, we're the very end of the Ridge and Valley geological area. I'm about an hour and 15 minutes west of Dahlonega. And actually Calhoun is the lowest point between Chattanooga and Atlanta, believe it or not. But also, we have Cherokee background here, and Major Ridge, whose home is in Rome, 20 miles away, influenced our decision for that name as well. And it is the Ridge because when we first registered the name, there was a graduate student somewhere who had a website called Ridge Books. So we put the Ridge.
Okay. So good. All right, Larry, we're going to be back with you in a moment, but I just want to remind everybody out there that the Rare Book Cafe, we are the only live stream program on the internet devoted entirely to rare books and collectibles and the people who love them, and that's YOU. Good morning, everybody. At least good morning from me here on the Pacific Daylight Time on this beautiful Memorial Day weekend. But we're brought to you every week on a Saturday at 12:30 Eastern Time, 5:30 Greenwich Mean Time. We are live streaming right now at this very moment on both YouTube and Facebook. And by the end of the day, we're going to be a podcast. Our illustrious engineer, Alan Smith, will convert all of these digital bits and bytes so you can take them with you and listen to them anytime, anywhere you may happen to be. With me today is Larry Rakow of Cleveland Heights, Ohio, the man from Wonderland Children's Books, collector Larry Rakow, and our cafe regular Lee Lynn. Good morning, Larry.
Good morning, Ed. It's also yeah, go ahead.
No, that's okay. I was just going to recap that you were going to share a little bit of Dr. Seuss with us, a little bit of politics, maybe a couple short eulogies, and we're looking forward to having you back.
Well, thank you. It's a delight to be back. I thought we would start out with the eulogies. You know, you and I were talking a little while ago about how an entire generation of children's book illustrators and authors, who many of us grew up with, and some of whom were really common names for all of us, have died within the last couple of years, and we're really seeing a passing of a golden age of children's writing and illustration. I mean, just names off the top of my head: Tommy DePaula and Beverly Cleary, and certainly Maurice Sendak and James Marshall and Trina Shart Hyman and Edward Gorey, all within a relatively short time have left us. And we should be very grateful to have lived during a period of time in which they were active and working and producing things that all of us and our children and our grandchildren can enjoy. This past week, we lost two big names, one somewhat bigger perhaps than the other, but both of them significant illustrators in the world and authors in the world of children's illustration. The first was Lois Ehlert, which folks who are not really into children's illustration may not know, but the name of one of her books, Chicka Chicka Boom Boom, which is a great name for a book, was a tremendous bestseller, sold many, many millions of copies, and she also, I'm getting some feedback, Ed. I don't. Okay. And she was also a Caldecott honoree several times. She was primarily known as sort of a colorist, and used collage in very, very wonderful ways to create very bold, colorful illustrations. I have one here called Growing Vegetable Soup, and just to give you an idea of the sort of work that she did, I mean, really just lovely, bold color work that really bounces off the page. She was a Midwesterner, sort of like myself, and just died this past week at 86 years of age. So thank you, Lois Ehlert. The one that folks may be more familiar with, because it certainly made national news, was Eric Carle. Eric was an interesting guy. He was born here in the United States, I believe, in Syracuse. But sometime after, his parents, both of whom were of German birth, decided to move back to Germany shortly before the Second World War. And although he himself Eric was not involved in war fighting, his father was conscripted into the German army and was really broken by it. He sort of soured on living there, of course, following the war, and moved back to the United States. And in the early 60s, did a lot of advertising work before he was finally convinced to start working in children's illustration. And Eric Carle became one of the major 20th century illustrators. He produced, I believe, more than 60 books of his own and illustrated a bunch of others. But the one, of course, that everybody knows and everybody remembers is the Very Hungry Caterpillar, one of the great children's books of the 20th century, and featured these wonderful die-cut holes as the caterpillar goes and eats through all of these until finally turning into a gorgeous butterfly at the end of the book. And amongst the other things that Carle achieved was the Laura Ingalls Wilder Award, which has since been renamed the Children's Legacy Award, which is given to an author who has made a significant, major contribution in the field of children's literature. And he also established, I just visited about 2 years ago, the Eric Carle Museum of Picture Book Art, which, if anybody is within spitting distance of this, you should go. It is in Amherst, Massachusetts. It is an absolutely amazing museum. that features not only Carl's work, but also large exhibitions of original children's book illustration from, every major illustrator you can imagine. So it is well worth the journey to Amherst. And those were the two,
Could you repeat that for us again? Where is the exhibit being held?
Yeah, it is. It's in Amherst, Massachusetts. And it is not just an exhibit, but it's an ongoing museum that Eric and his wife created, I think, in 2002. So it's been around for a while, 20 years. And Gail Jackson, hi, and yes, yeah. Chicka Chicka Boom Boom is a great book. It's a great book.
Well, thank you, Larry. Before you dive into your next subject, thank you for those kind words on those great authors. I would just like to remind everybody who's listening to us live right now that later in the show, we're going to have our cafe regular Barbara Lowe of Cardatique in Osprey, Florida, and a special guest, the president of the Ephemera Society of America, Dick Sheaf. He's going to be talking to us a little bit and helping us understand gaslight topography, which we use on the graphics on our show. So stick around, folks. But now let's get back to Larry and talk a little bit about his main subject today, Dr. Seuss.
Yeah, this has been an interesting period, and the whole thing took place not too long ago. I have a couple of documents that I'll read from here. On March 2nd, which is really the date that all of this began, Dr. Seuss Enterprises, which is a quasi-independent group. It has its own board of directors and so on, but it's also associated with Random House, which is the publisher for Dr. Seuss, issued a statement. And for those of us within the children's book community, it was not entirely unexpected because there had been talk about this sort of thing for a while. But for the community, the culture at large, it was a shock. And let me just read from it. It says, today on Dr. Seuss's birthday, Dr. Seuss Enterprises celebrates reading and also our mission of supporting all children and families with messages of hope, inspiration, inclusion, and friendship. We are committed to that action. And to that end, Dr. Seuss Enterprises, working with a panel of experts, including educators, reviewed our catalog of titles and made the decision last year to cease publication and licensing of the following titles. And to think that I saw it on Mulberry Street, If I Ran the Zoo, McElligot's Pool, On Beyond Zebra, Scrambled Eggs Super, and The Cat's Quizzer. These books portray people in ways that are hurtful and wrong. This started a tsunami of reactions from any number of quarters, not the least of which was within the collecting community. And I guess the most apparent response was from eBay. All of a sudden, these 6 titles, which had ceased publication, there were hundreds of listings on eBay, which were not standard descriptions of collectible materials. Those of us who collect Seuss, and we have a nice collection of Seuss at Wonderland Books, try to find first editions in fine condition, in original dust jackets, and all of that went by the board on eBay.
I'm shocked.
Yes, what a shock. So that people were selling, 625th editions in paperback, missing the front cover of to think that I saw it on Mulberry Street, for example, for hundreds of dollars, literally hundreds of dollars. There were materials that came out as premiums from various places that were again selling for incredible amounts of money and completely undercutting any rules that we as book dealers have established as collectible materials. So one of the things that I thought as this went down was that very few of us, even those of us who are interested in books and book collecting, very few of us probably have actually seen not the books themselves, but the illustrations that have caused all of these problems. And I thought we'd spend some time today actually going through all of the books and showing the illustrations that raised concern to Seuss Enterprises and that eventually led to the dispublication, the non-publication of these titles. So let's do it in pretty much chronological order, and I'll go in, except with one exception, when we'll flip back a little bit. The first one, and probably the most popular of all of the 6 titles that were discontinued, was And to Think That I Saw It on Mulberry Street, which is Seuss's very first children's publication. This was issued all the way back in 1930 something, and was the very first of the Seuss children's books. One of the things for collectors that you might want to note is that the very first issue of And to Think That I Saw It on Mulberry Street by Dr. Seuss actually has the boy on the front in white shorts rather than blue shorts. That's the point. That's the way to go and figure out whether it's a true first edition. And regardless of whether it was published or not published, ceased or not, this is a book that easily sells for many thousands of dollars in first edition. Regardless, why was Dr. Seuss's first book pulled from publication? Well, if we see the first illustration, and it is all because of this. The one on the right is from a first edition, A Chinese Boy Who Eats with Sticks. And you can see the kind of stereotypical depiction of a young Chinese boy with his queue in the back and eating with chopsticks and with yellow skin. In future publications, notably, that was changed, and here's a more recent edition of Mulberry Street, in which the skin tone has been turned to white and the pigtail has disappeared, but still with a sort of slanty-eyed look to it. And this is an illustration that has been under fire for quite a while. And it is the reason why the book is no longer being published. Moving not on, but back just a bit. I'm not sure how many of our listeners realize that Dr. Seuss was a popular political cartoonist during the Second World War. And because of all of the notoriety that the depictions in these books, which caused them to be pulled from publication, because of that notoriety, there was some question about where Dr. Seuss stood on these social issues. And the truth is that he was tremendously progressive and liberal in his social outlook, with perhaps a couple of exceptions. Let's take a look at some of the cartoons that he created. Here's Adolf Hitler, Put Your Finger Here, Pal, the race hatred gift, and who is helping him do that but the U.S. anti-Semite. Here's an example of a popular sort of, feeling that Asians tend to look the same. Here's Waiting for the Signal from Home. The Honorable Fifth Column is handing out TNT to an endless group of West Coast Asians. Moving right along. What have you done today to help save our country from them? Here's you. Here's Adolf Hitler on the left and the Japanese ruler on the right. There is some question from people why Hitler was always portrayed not as horrible, in such a horrible way as others. And Seuss's family themselves were of German origin. And the sense is that Hitler was a known commodity. He knew how to draw people who looked like him, while he tended to characterize and stereotype those who did not. And then finally, I think there was yet another one, right? just in terms of his politics, listen, Maestro, says Uncle Sam, if you want to get real harmony, use the black keys as well as the white. And that referred to black labor as well as white labor to win the war through the war industry. So his, with the possible exception of those Asian depictions, his politics are obviously progressive, but they do fall short when referencing people of Asian origin. Let's move on. In 1947, McElligot's Pool came along. This is one of those that I referenced earlier that was given away as a premium here. If you buy some Crest or Prel shampoo, you got a paperback McElligot's Pool. These were going for crazy amounts during that period of time. But what was it within McElligot's Pool that they found offensive? It was actually the depiction here, some Eskimo fish. There are several of the books were pulled because of depictions of Native Americans, including Eskimo and Inuit peoples. And here the little fish are all dressed up. I think we have a close-up of this also. Yeah, all dressed up in little Eskimo suits and so on. That was considered enough to go and pull this book. The next one is If I Ran the Zoo. This was 1950. So, we're encroaching on modern times here. And here are two that I think most people would agree are particularly offensive. The first one, an African island of Yerka. And here we have some, extraordinarily stereotypical and offensive depictions of Black folks. And also appearing in this book was another depiction of Asians here with their hands folded in little funny shoes with slanty eyes. These were the reasons why this book was pulled from publication. A couple of years later, in 1953, Scrambled Egg Super once again had the depiction of Eskimos, and also the first depiction of that was considered offensive to those who grew up in the Middle East. There is a picture of a fellow in a turban and big sort of voluminous pants and so on. On Beyond Zebra was published in 1954. Oh, like so, right? This is from On Beyond Zebra, yet another depiction of a Middle Eastern character on a Dr. Seuss camel. And then finally, The Cat's Quizzer, which is, by most standards, fairly recent. This is 1976. There were two illustrations that were pointed out in that. The first, simply saying, food, do the Japanese eat with pogo sticks or joss sticks? And the second, which says, how old, do we have that one coming up? There we go. How old do you have to be a Boy Scout or a Girl Scout? But on the second page down at the bottom, we have a blow up. How old do you have to be a Japanese? Which I don't really even understand, but once again, features an Asian character with yellow skin. And so those were the 6 books that created this controversy once the books were pulled. Some of them, I think, by any standards, are understandable, but move further away from an obviously offensive line than others do. And the reaction to these, once the decision was announced, was almost immediate. Let me read one reaction from eBay, for instance. Anyone who went and posted any of those books that were bringing thousands and thousands of dollars, regardless of condition or edition, on eBay, anyone who was posting one of those received something that said, your listing was removed, offensive material policy. We had to remove your listing because it didn't follow our offensive material policy. Listings that promote or glorify hatred, violence, or discrimination aren't allowed. Dr. Seuss Enterprises has stopped publication of this book due to its negative portrayal of some ethnicities. As a courtesy, we have ended your item and refunded your selling fees. So that any of those books that were actually mentioned in the line on eBay were removed.
Did any other selling sources do that, as far as you're aware?
As far as I know, no.
ABE, Amazon, no.
I think the most apparent and immediate effect was on eBay. And then there was sort of a divide that took place in this country, as virtually everything does nowadays, between the left and the right. The right immediately pointed to this as an example of cancel culture. A somewhat, to my mind, disingenuous position, considering that the right has been the instigator of any number of calls for canceling books, movies, television programs, and so on. But in this particular instance, I have to admit that there were moments when, as a former librarian and something of a libertarian, felt that this kind of material is best used in the public domain as a source of teaching. We want to know how our culture is evolving. We want to know how we're moving forward. And by eliminating titles, we simply eliminate a segment of the past that we can very well be ashamed of, but should not be put in a dark closet and locked away. So so that's a personal reaction to it.
Lee, I saw you raise your hand there. Did you have a couple questions for Larry?
Actually, my son asked me last night if we had I was telling him about our problem with the mute and unmute buttons, a couple of weeks ago. And he said, do you have a feature that puts up a little hand when you want to? He said, there are some programs that do that. But anyway, as far as to think that I saw it on Mulberry Street, I agree about the pictures, completely. But I also always admired the little boy's imagination in coming up with this list of things that he saw on Mulberry Street. And it would be kind of neat to see it done, a similar book done, in another way, because I never liked If I Ran the Zoo. I always found that offensive. And Ed, I'm very sorry, but our least favorite one was One Fish, Two Fish.
No.
I got so tired of that book. And fortunately, it's not one of my grandchildren's favorites.
Yes.
But their school did not cancel anything Dr. Seuss that week. They had a book a day, costumes, food, none of those 6 books. But Dr. Seuss week went on as planned.
That's good to hear. It really is, Lee.
It did.
Yeah. It is. I mean, we are living in interesting times, and the fact is that all of us want to move things forward. But as historians, as people who are interested in books that were published earlier than yesterday, we have to recognize that there are some of these that are simply going to be offensive in various ways. I think earlier I mentioned the Laura Ingalls Wilder Award, which was given by the American Library Association to a significant contributor to the field of children's literature for years, and it was considered one of the major awards that anybody could receive. Recently, because of her depiction of African Americans and of Native Americans in the series of books that she wrote, they decided to strike her name from that award and to simply refer to it as a children's illustrated children's book legacy award. And as we evolve as a culture, hopefully as we evolve as people, we can make these adjustments, but to turn our backs on grew up or published during a different time in a different culture, is sometimes is problematic. Regardless, my final thing on this, and then we can move on to something even more interesting, is that publishers have the right to discontinue publications of books whenever they want. And there are hundreds upon hundreds, I might say thousands of books during some years that cease publication. Now, the vast majority of those cease publication because they're not selling, but there are instances of publishers pulling books because they're offensive and because they simply, and it is the right of Dr. Seuss Enterprises and Random House to make these decisions about books. Thankfully, Dr. Seuss was prolific enough and produced enough unbelievably wonderful material that he is in no danger of disappearing from the children's book world.
Are you beginning to see a trend? Or did the Dr. Seuss Association begin something here that other publishers are beginning to follow in their footsteps?
It's an interesting question, Ed. I'm not not in enough with publishers to know the answer to that, but I think that publishers in this environment, in this cultural moment, are starting to take a look at materials and making some determinations based on those factors.
I have another question. It's fairly easy to understand in the United States when most of these authors are European descent, white folks, that this kind of, in the past, that this kind of racial profiling occurred in children's books and that kind of thing. What about in other countries? For example, England, with so many colonial populations to treat this way, India, Jamaica, whatever, Africa. What's it like in other countries in children's books?
It's an excellent question, and I wish that I had a more definitive answer for it. I would suspect that there are other countries that are taking the same sort of look, although if England were to cease publication on every book that had to do with colonial depictions, I would imagine that we'd be able to fit our libraries in our back pockets. But somebody just chimed in and said, "I'm sure that every book ever written," Gail Jackson says, offended someone, and I'm certain that that's true as well. But there are egregious instances of this. And I guess the other thing that people were particularly concerned about is that, if we as adults read material that was written for adults that we can think about and find offensive and deal with in some way, it's different from going and presenting images like this to children who may not have the faculty to realize that what is being depicted is particularly offensive. And so I think the bar is somewhat different when dealing with children and dealing with adults. Yeah.
Well, Larry, maybe someday you'll give us the genealogy of Little Black Sambo.
That's another very, very interesting and particularly interesting because there have been some prominent African-American illustrators who have tackled that recently. And, by number one, eliminating the name Sambo, which has, very, very negative connotations, and also depicting characters in realistic ways. But perhaps we will go into that at some point, or maybe I can find an African-American friend who can sit beside me so I wouldn't feel so awkward doing it. But
whatever you're going to present, we're always glad to have you back, Larry.
Oh, thank you. It's a pleasure being here, and I'll be here. I'll mute myself, but be here for the rest of the
And we'll see you next month.
That sounds great.
And how about you, Barbara? What do you go? Lee, how about you, Lee? What's your next topic going to be? Have you?
Ooh, I don't know. I don't know. We haven't talked about it, but we'll come up with something.
Well, now that you're not on the museum board anymore, it's time to get cracking.
I reckon it is.
All right, folks, have a wonderful Memorial Day weekend.
Thank you. You too, Ed.
Cheerio. All right, before we get into our next live segment, I would like to make a point that later in the show, we're going to have a few of our typically pre-recorded segments. This is not an attempt to trick anybody or make you think we aren't live, because I'm certainly live. I can pinch myself and feel it. But some of our presenters can't always be here every week. Later on in the show, we're going to have David Hess, of Bookman Bookstore in Orange, California, with his ever popular Things Found in Books, followed by Lynn Thompson. Lynn's The Story Behind the Story. We had a little bit of technical difficulty with Lynn last week, so we got it down on tape. We've got it down digitally. He's going to be talking to us about Margaret Wise Brown, the great book, children's favorite, must be Children's Week here, Good Night, Little Moon. Lynn will also have a short feature on the man who wrote those daunting words, "It was a dark and stormy night," Edward Bulwer Linton. But now we're going to get back to the live portion of our show. Let me bring in our guest. Barbara Lowe has been with us before. Barbara is from the Ephemera Society of America, and along with her this week, she brought the president of the whole shebang, the president of the Ephemera Society of America, Dick Sheaf. Welcome aboard, folks.
Thank you. Thank you kindly. Barbara, are you speaking at this point, or should I speak? Okay, I guess I should speak.
Jump right into you. That's it. What's your topic this week?
Thank you very. Well, the topic this week that I was asked to say a few words on is something called gaslight style, and it's a somewhat obscure corner of Victorian design and design history. Having a lot to do with typography, but it isn't really all about typography.
Dick, excuse me, that's the typography that our executive producer has chosen to use on the show here. All of the promotions seem to be in this gaslight style. Maybe that's why Alan asked you to join us, to give us some validation.
Well, I admire your I guess, what would you call it, your home landing page, and you're right, it does have the kind of drop shadows that are typical of gaslight. Allow me to sort of, I won't read it entirely, but kind of skim over some words that are on my website. I have an old website that people still sort of like, so I leave it up there, that has a lot of ephemera of one kind or another in different categories, one of which is this gaslight. If anybody wants to look it up another time, it's sheaf-ephemera.com, and you can check out these topics. And there are many examples of many things, including this gaslight style, quote unquote, that we're talking about today. One aspect of Victorian design was, in a certain period, and this was in the 70s and 80s primarily, was an interest in creating a great illusion of depth in the materials they were printing. This was particularly with lithographers. The various elements, types, vignettes, products, design elements, they were made to seem multi-layered through the use of shadows, superimposition, dimensional banners and ribbons, turned up faux corners as if a page was being lifted up, choice of colors, some receding, some coming into the foreground. And some have in the past labeled this gaslight design, and I too have picked this up and have used it for quite some time. Maurice Rickards, or Rickards, take your pick, from England, very prominent ephemera man, said, quote unquote, this is said to have derived from the play of lamps on three-dimensional street lettering, i.e. store frontage sign, etc. And the style seems to have originated in Germany. In other words, it's kind of culturally related to the technology going on at the time, where in towns and cities there were big signs, often with thick dimensional lettering, and at night particularly gaslight would illuminate them in such a way that they would cast shadows, and a feeling of that came into the printed materials. Rickards goes on to describe it at this kind of heavily three-dimensional lettering in some detail, calling it chiaroscuro effects of gaslighting. I won't go through all of that. You can find the rest of those words on my website. It was used universally in the Western world. It was used in Russia. It was used all over the place. One complication with it is that it's easy enough to describe that part of it that I have now, and I'll hold up a few examples in a minute or two. But it's often hard to say, well, gee, is this particular one an example of gaslight? Because what happened at that period of time was there was a tremendous intermixing of styles. It had fairly recently become finally possible to print promotional and advertising and magazine materials in color, and all kinds of things were being tried, and many styles were in vogue, and often they were used simultaneously. And so a given whatever might have elements of gaslight and elements of Japanesque, Egyptian, stickly so-called design, artistic printing, which strictly speaking was a letterpress activity and not a lithographic activity. But the point is there was an admixture of stylistic things going on that designers, although hardly any called themselves designers at that point. It's been the first attribution of a career as graphic design has been attributed to Dwiggins, but there were in fact some Victorians who used that terminology. So let me just hold up a number of items that kind of show that. Some of these are the real objects. Some of them are photocopies I ran off today because I don't know exactly where the real objects are at this place.
Dick, excuse me a second before you go on. I apologize for my ignorance. Who is Dwiggins?
William Dwiggins, who was an incredible typographer and artist in the 20th century, and font designer.
Okay.
And there has actually been a wonderful, wonderful book that many of you may know of, recently put out by the Letterpress Forum, the Letterpress Archive, excuse me, in San Francisco, done by Bruce Kennett, and is a incredibly well-researched and well-produced book that is totally thorough on the career of W.A. Dwiggins, if you're interested in it. He was also a puppet master. He was quite a lot of things.
Cool.
So some examples, and let's see how this holding things up to the camera works.
You're doing just fine.
This, is the sort of thing that you'll see there are some drop shadows happening, but in addition, they were exploring other things like the uses of ribbons, the use of diagonals, the uses of type itself that had shadow to it, as well as the banners that they were on casting shadows. All of these things contributing to this sort of sense of three-dimensional depth in a flat printed piece. Here is another example, if I can find the right place for it. Crump was a major printer of these kinds of material, show cards, trade cards, and signage, and all sorts of things. But you can see that we've got lots of curves and convolution and things going over other things and under other things and casting shadows. Very, very kind of high gaslight, if you will.
Dick, it seems to me with all those curvings, it was not really reusable, was it? Were they able to take?
Well, yes, because this is none of this is letterpress. This is all lithography.
Okay.
So it was done on stone, and then it was done, and some of it was done on stone, some of it was done on metal plates, some of it was done. Lithography itself was going through great changes at the time. The technology was advancing sort of by the week, and so they got more and more ways of doing it, and ways of taking what had been steel engraved and putting it onto something flat so they could print it by lithography.
And I think chromolithography came about in 1885 or so.
Well, it actually goes back further than that. Senefelder invented, the black and white version in 1893 or 5, whatever it was. But through the 60s, I would say, and into the certainly into the 70s, chromolithography was more and more and more available. Okay. And there's a whole other story that has nothing to do with what we're talking about today, about the big difference that made in book design, because book design had never had cover. If it had color plates in the earlier days, as all of you know better than I, they tended to be black and white plates that were hand colored, or
sure.
stencil colored or whatever. This is another period piece. This is actually, you can see at the bottom, this is from some lithographers' offerings that said this cut is available. But you can see that even there was a fascination with gaslight and what effect it had on typography in that era. Here's a black and white card for, what is this for printers. And you can see that this business of overlapping and layering can get very, very complicated, but lots of things of casting shadows of one kind or another. Again, that with the kind of loose analogy, it's as if that there was a gaslight up above, or you were holding it out in the sunshine and it was a three-dimensional piece that was casting these sorts of shadows. There's also ribbons, and the ribbons curl up at the bottom. There's a trompe l'oeil sorts of things going on.
And they were trying to, Dick, can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
Yeah, they were trying to show off on these printers cards all the different things that they could do for their customers. So that's why these printers cards are so elaborate, is they were really trying to show how artistic and talented their staff was.
Well, that's true, and much of what you see, and I guess of what I've shown you so far, actually are for printers. There are people in the printing industry. It might have been for plate makers or ink makers or whatever, but they also did it for their clients. It's funny because earlier, while I was listening, while you were starting up, I was sorting some trade cards in a different category, in the letterpress artistic printing category, and there particularly 99% of what you find, the examples are by printers or people in the printing industries. It's relatively rare to find it where they got customers to say, "Hey, I like that too. Let's do my card that way." But there are examples of it. They're just harder to find than ones in the printing industry itself. Well, now here's one actually, I guess timely. This is for a client, not for a printer. The printer who is at the bottom. I can't see it right now. I can look if you want, but this is a printer doing a label for a cotton mill in that style. All those same kinds of elements going on, though. Here is, well, now we're back to the people who did it, the show card manufacturers. Russell Morgan was a very well-known show card and business card and trade card manufacturer who very much worked at this time and in this sort of a style. A British example, steel engraved, again, a printer or a steel engraver in this case. With all of these kinds of illusions of depth. This says other things going on to it. The head is anaglyptography, if you're familiar with that. It's sort of like an engraving technique where you do like a map contour drawing in order to make something look three-dimensional. So there are lots of things going on technologically in that card. And here are finally a few actual cards, smaller items, but some actual cards. This is a Russell Morgan label or card. The weight of this one, I can feel it as I'm holding my hand, is sort of in between. It's kind of not heavy enough to be sure it's a card and not light enough to be sure it's a label. I'm not sure which it is. It's somewhere in between. But the style, has those elements in it, as well as some figural things, the little cherub riding on an eagle with pens and quills in his hand, I guess. A style similar to this was used often by Geese up in, where were they, Buffalo, I guess, where they did quite a few things in a somewhat similar style with these same sorts of elements. There's a rolled piece of paper at the top, and there's type with dimension and depth, and there's bars and banners going across that themselves cast shadows. This one is an example, another one by a printer, but you can see the heavy cast shadows in this. This one is, I believe, well, no, this one is not steel engraved. It looks like it was originally, but then converted to litho and printed by lithography. This is an example for a client, not a printer. How do I hold this steady? An insurance company. It's a folder actually. It's got a front and a back, but stylistically very kind of high camp gaslight. And I guess there's just one more that I pulled out for today's brief show. This one is in black and white. It's a photo engraving company in New York. And this is one, again, that begins to combine a lot of elements. It's got those things I've been talking about, but it's got, sort of some arts and crafts style to it and other influences coming in. And it's gets to be one of those questions, not that you need to define what category they're in anyway, but if you're trying to say, is this one exactly what we're talking about? Well, sort of. It is and it isn't.
Dick, I'm curious about how international this is. I mean, I see these examples, and it could be in French, it could be in Russian, it could be in German. It just seemed to be very dominant during that time period.
No, absolutely. You can find, and I have examples of Russian ones, striking Russian ones, and many German ones. The thought is that the impulse may have come from Germany in the first place. Somewhere I've got a piece of original art in that style for a Russian. I'm gonna forget what it was for, but it was a label, a Russian label for a liquid that's done in that style. So yes, it very much Ed was an international style.
Barbara, do you have any of these examples in your collection? Do you see this come across in the things that you collect as well?
Well, yeah, you see them everywhere. I didn't pull any because I knew Dick was pulling some today,
okay.
but yeah, I mean it's very prevalent in
you mostly do cards, right?
In the trade cards. Well, I do a ton of things: Valentine's, trade cards,
yeah.
Documents. We all get into a little bit of everything, but
lack of impulse control.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, that's true. So, but it's just graphically, it's so striking when you see these images, and they're just beautiful. And one of the things that's interesting too, at the Ephemera Society conference a number of years ago, we had an English author come and speak to us, David Jury, and he had produced a book looking at these various printing styles and everything. And what we're finding today is a lot of today's artists are going back and looking at these styles for inspiration for their printing and their work today.
If I may, on that note, let me kind of get up and reach for something, because it's right. It follows what you just said. Kind of on a shelf behind me on the wall is an example of that. David's book, which is called Graphic Design Before Graphic Designers, is a wonderful book. But here's a recent, or maybe it's 3, 4, 5 years old album now by John Mayer, which is done in time. Why can't I get this backwards thing going? Which is done entirely in that style, although it was just done recently. That's something that's interested me greatly, and increasingly others too. That after years of designers being taught that less was more, and the clean, crisp Bauhaus style was the only way to design, and Victorian frippery was just decorative nonsense. The kids on their own are discovering that, hey, wait a minute, that stuff is interesting, and there's a lot of that we like, and they're picking it up, which is interesting and encouraging.
All things old are new again, and speaking for myself, that's true.
I have a question.
Somebody asked a question here. What should a beginning collector know to start a collection, or what they should do? My advice is to collect what appeals to you. Whatever strikes your eye is the best way to get started. And then as you start collecting more, you start to learn more about it and your eye becomes more refined. But my advice is always collect the thing that speaks to you. And I think that's true with books too. I mean, it's true with anything. You should, I think it's a mistake when people think, oh, I'm going to collect to invest money for the future. I think you should collect something that brings you joy.
Of course.
Sure.
Do what you love. Lee, did you have a question?
Yes, I do. Most of the examples that you showed were really ads for printers. Basically, this looks like a very expensive process for that date and time. Did a lot of customers actually use this type of? I mean, I've seen labels and things, that look to me like that's what it is. But was the expense a holdback for people using this in day-to-day practice in their companies?
Well, yes, customers did use it. Many of the examples that we see, because the most elaborate ones, as Barbara mentioned, tend to be done by the printers because they're showing off. They wanted to throw in every bell and whistle known to man, and so there you go. But yes, customers also did it. You can. I had mentioned that with the artistic printing, it's relatively harder, because that was a really difficult letterpress process, and not so many customers went for it, but some did. But with lithography, much more so. Lithography was cheaper, and yes, a lot of customers did spring for it.
Yeah.
Well, we're bumping up against the end of the segment. Barbara, before we move on, could you share with us an update on the Ephemera Society of America? Any news coming out of Florida on that?
Well, we do have news. So we have just released, we've chosen our theme for next year's conference, and we're very excited about it. It's creating places and spaces. And so it's all about architecture and landscaping and whatever interior design. And so that's posted on our website and in our newsletter, if you're a member. And we've put it out on a number of listservs. So we're taking submissions for presenters for that. And we're very excited about that. And then in August, we're going to do a little mini conference. And that is going to be, we did our virtual conference in March. And so it was such a success, we decided that in August, we're going to do kind of a mini conference. And that is going to be on the 13th, Friday the 13th. I don't think we thought about that when we picked that day. But it's also going to be tied with another ESA virtual fair that is going to start Thursday evening for members, and then open to the public on Friday. And so we're very excited about that. And one last thing.
Another online Ephemera fair coming up in August.
Right. And then I'm going to put in a plug for the New England Book and Paper Fair next weekend in Concord, New Hampshire, because this is really going to be the first live fair that we know of. And there's going to be a lot of book dealers, a lot of ephemera dealers. And we hope that if you're up in that area, you'll stop by, because people get together again to look at books and paper.
And so let's remind everybody, even though it's made up of 6 states, everything is nearby New England. The 2-hour drive to anywhere in New England. So come on up to the show, everybody. Thank you.
Hey, if I could steal 10 seconds.
You can steal 15.
It's to answer one of a question I see that people have just asked. A couple of people have asked, where can you find original examples of gaslight type material? I would suggest coming to the Ephemera Show in Greenwich in March next year, where we're going to be on the ground again. We're going to have a real show, and it's a big show, and there are many dozens of dealers, and you'd be able to find quite a lot of that material if you're interested.
All right, we'll make sure
And
we
that's
get
in
that one
Greenwich,
on the Rare
Connecticut.
Book Cafe calendar. Greenwich, Connecticut, March of 2022.
Right.
Thank you, Dick. You have been brilliant. I hope you'll come back sometime. I'm sure you are a font of knowledge.
Well, I don't know about that, but I appreciate it very much. It's been fun. Thank you very much.
And good to see you again, Barbara.
Good to see you guys.
All right, and we'll see you in a few minutes, Lynn. Right now, folks, we're ready to move on to our next segment, our weekly segment. Been here for quite a while. Things Found in Books by our guy, Dave Hess of the Bookman Bookstore in Orange, California. Always interesting, always fun, always entertaining, and always the curious things you find inside that front cover. What do you got for us this week, David?
Hello, this is David from the Bookman in Orange, California, welcoming you to this week's This is David from the Bookman in Orange, California, welcoming you to this week's segment of Things Found in Old Books. And I'm happy to say I have a nice little crop of things found that I'm going to share with you. Plus, one person sent something in, so we get to share that as well. I'm very excited. So let's get started right away. First off, in this rather tattered old book, that's an old Western, The Thunderer by Barrington, I think. I can't really read that. Anyway, in this old book, it doesn't match the card. And what I found in the book was a business card like this. Now, I'm a big fan of finding business cards in books. I think they're really cool because a lot of times they're of businesses long gone and so forth. And so, but they always have a certain look. And I did a little research on this one. It's for Art S. Leach, Realtor. And now Art Leach Realtor, I did a little research online, and apparently they just kind of went out of business in 2018. So, and he was kind of a bigwig in the San Diego area realtor circles. He was the chairman of the board for a while. And but the card belongs to a Bud Eminger. So he was a worker there for Art. And the card opens up. It's closed. It opens up. I guess you can set it on a table or something like that, you know. And it tells you what he does here. And then he has the different offices listed here. And again, the phone numbers are all those early phone numbers with letters in the number. And they're pretty short, like W6175 is one of the phone numbers, W6175. And from what I can tell, again, doing a little research, this is from 1955. So not spectacular, but again, I'm a big fan of the business card, so I want to share it with you because I just love finding business cards in books. So that's number one. Number two was this paperback. I was going through a box of paperbacks that someone brought in or left at our store. We get a lot of donations, and so it's a book on Nino Cochise, The First 100 Years, written by Ciye, C-I-Y-E, Cochise. Now, I was almost going to throw this out. In fact, when I was lifting up the book to share it today, the whole cover popped off. The thing is fairly bad shape. But on the inside of the cover that popped off is a signature of the authors, C-I-Y-E, Ciye. I hope I'm doing it right, the name. Ciye Cochise. Signed it there on the inside of the cover of this paperback. But further inspection of the book, I found this envelope there. And the envelope obviously has a history that I can't quite follow. The gentleman here from Santa Ana, California, out here near me, sent this to Chief Saeed Cochise in Arizona, to the Arizona Sonora Museum. But it says not at this address, and return to sender, and on the back it's post dated 1974. But inside the envelope that was apparently sent back is a picture of doing a search. There we go. That's a Saeed Cochise sitting at a table with somebody. He's got a cigar. He's sitting there looking very comfortable, and he has a big smile on his face. And so I'm assuming the picture is also from the 1974 era. And so apparently either the guy was sending this to him to get signed, or somehow he got this and sent it back. I don't know. But there it is, the envelope, the picture, the signature on the book. And I don't know how I'll preserve that, or if anybody would be interested. I think I like it. Anyway, next in line, I found in this book here, which is not, it's it's a book, but it's more of an annual for a college, and it's from the annual is signed 1895, Mount Holyoke College, which is in Massachusetts. And it's an old annual. It's not the kind of annual that has a lot of pictures in it as far as individual pictures, but it has pictures of groups and things like that. And here's, like, of a special interest to me is this picture of the Banjo Club. I'm sorry. Anyway, the reason why, because in this annual here of the Banjo Club is this little program that was also in the annual. Mount Holyoke College Glee and Banjo Club, Memorial Hall, Worcester, May 4th, 1897. It's a program to the Banjo and Glee Club performances in 1897. And, it's a list of the songs they're going to perform. Can't say that I recognize any of them. But and then here's a member of the Glee Club and a member of the Banjo Club, and we see a picture there of the Banjo Club. So apparently these players are in the picture. And and there's an ad for mandolins on the back, Eclipse mandolins. But what I find amazing about this particular program is that it feels to me like it's been in the annual since 1897. I mean, it's so pristine, unsoiled, not, the edges are really crisp and tight. It's like it's just been sitting there, waiting to be discovered again. And it's in beautiful shape. You'd hardly even know it's from 1897. But I felt that was a super, I'd say a super duper find. Anyway, and lastly, for the things that I came across, this is really, really interesting. It's quite fascinating. Now this book here is the Memorial Life of William McKinley, published after his assassination. And you see these kind of books a lot. They printed them in the day of. They have one for the Titanic. They have one for the Johnstown flood. They were sensationalist books at the time, or not sensationalist, would they capitalize on a national tragedy or something like that, and they would publish these books. And so they do show up quite often, but they look very interesting. And in this, I found something I've never ever come across. It's a box of 5-cent cigars for 5 cents. And what that means, according to this little googad here, is that what you do is you buy this booklet here for you buy it for 50 cents. You buy the booklet and you get 4 coupons. And what you do is you sell a coupon to a friend. And once that friend fills it out and sends it in, then they send you another. Once it's confirmed that they've bought them and sent them in, you get a 5-cent cigar box for 5 cents. So I imagine there's a bunch of cigars in it, and they. I'm sorry, but the back part fell off, and recently, clumsy me. And it has an order blank on the back for the brands of cigars that you can get, and so it's kind of like a pyramid scheme, a little Ponzi scheme going on there. So they want you to buy the coupons, sell to your friends, and then you get your product. So you get now in this book here that I have, all 4 coupons are intact. So this gentleman didn't do his job. He just decided, to hell with it, I'll go to another store and buy a cigar. Put it in the book, and now it's mine. Anyway, that's all I have for today. However, I would like to share something found in used books sent to me from a watcher here on this program. And it came from Lee Lynn of Ridge Books in Georgia. And let me read what she wrote. And I'll also put up the pictures that she sent, and we'll share with you. It says, "Hi, David. I always enjoy things found in books, but I had forgotten this gem until I had an order for the book today. A paperback copy of James Campbell's This is the Beat Generation, University of California, first paperback edition, 2001, with the distinctive signature of Ferlinghetti, of Lawrence Ferlinghetti, on the title page, and 2 sticky notes in his handwriting indicating errors in the book regarding city lights. And I suppose he should have known." That is awesome. I really enjoy that. And what a find that is, huh? So thanks again. I do appreciate it. And if any of you have anything that you would like to share, I'd be overjoyed to present it here on Things Found in Books. If you want to share those items, send them to oldbook@ebookman.com. That's oldbook@ebookman.com. Well, that's all I have for today. And this is David from the Bookman in Orange, California. Thank you very much. Thank you for having me, and I'll see you next week. Bye-bye.
Welcome back, everybody. A cigar Ponzi scheme. The brilliance of the American entrepreneur never ceases to amaze me. All right, folks. Last week, we had some technical difficulties with our associate producer, Lynn Thompson. The internet gremlins got into his computer and didn't let him finish his segment on Margaret Wise Brown, who wrote the children's favorite, Goodnight Moon, everybody's favorite. It's probably on the list of books that your children have read. So we're going to take a little journey down Lynn Thompson Lane with a segment on Margaret Wise Brown. And for an added attraction, he's going to include a little bit of info this week on It Was a Dark and Stormy Night, the author who brought those immortal words to us. Here we go.
Hi everyone, I'm Lynn Thompson, joining you from Chester, South Carolina, where summer has arrived over this past weekend. Of course, in South Carolina, most of the year is summer, with not quite summer and still summer bracketing the period. But today it's 95 degrees at 12:30 in the afternoon, and we're all just sitting here in the shade in the library hoping for the best, me and the dogs. But in the meantime, time weighing upon our hands, I thought I'd take another crack at a show I started live last week, and the technology gods disapproved. So let's take another swing at an author whose name everyone knows, but nobody knows much about, and that is the woman I call the wild child of children's lit, Margaret Wise Brown, who was born in 1910 and died in 1952. I think it's probably safe to say that in America, most everybody knows the book Goodnight Moon. The text is a rhyming poem describing a bunny's bedtime ritual of saying goodnight to various inanimate and living objects in its bedroom. A red balloon, a pair of socks, the bunny's dollhouse, a bowl of something to eat, and two kittens, among others. And if you look carefully, despite the kittens, a mouse is still present in each spread. You can also find out by looking carefully at the illustrations that the book begins at 7 p.m. and ends at 8:10, with each spread being spaced 10 minutes apart, as measured by two clocks in the room and reflected in the rising moon through the window. Brown based Goodnight Moon on her own childhood ritual of saying goodnight to the toys and other objects in the nursery she shared with her sister Roberta, a memory that came back to her in a vivid dream as an adult. The text she jotted down upon waking is at once both cozy and unsettling, mimicking and inducing the unmoored feeling that comes with drifting away to sleep. Unlike so many children's books with their pat plots and clumsy didactics, it's also one that parents can stand rereading, and even an uncle like me, and not only for its soporific effect on sons, daughters, nieces, and nephews. But the book that's so famous today nearly wasn't a success at all, and that brings me to the story of Margaret Wise Brown. Her grandfather, Benjamin Gratz Brown, was a dueling Missouri abolitionist who helped found the Republican Party, raised a regiment in the Civil War, served as senator from and governor of Missouri, and ran for vice president on Horace Greeley's ticket in 1872. Margaret's parents, once married, didn't get on well, and for those of means, one solution for having kids and fights was to pack the kids off to boarding school. Their daughter Margaret was so raised, and after graduating from Hollins College in 1932, she went to New York and became a teacher at an experimental school. Less than keen on what her students were being given to read, Margaret Brown tried her hand at writing kids' books herself. Her first, When the Wind Blew, was published by Harper's in 1937, and she spent the first royalty check entirely on a street peddler's flower cart. Early success led to an editing job at the publisher W.R. Scott, charged with developing a series of children's books by adult authors. She struck out with Hemingway and Steinbeck, but scored with Gertrude Stein. Brown adored the repetitive, whimsical style of Stein's writings, and the expat author was then all the rage after the success of the autobiography of Alice B. Toklas in 1933 and her barnstorming 1934-35 American lecture tour. The World is Round was the result, and Brown's first collaboration with a young illustrator, Clement Hurd. When you read the lines of Brown's text, in the great green room there was a telephone and a red balloon, you hear a little more than a bit of Gertrude Stein shining through. In her short life, Brown produced over 100 children's books, two of which turned out to have the magic of immortality about them. The Runaway Bunny from 1942 and Goodnight Moon in 1947. Both were illustrated by Hurd, although in her career she worked with nearly every significant children's book author of the time. When Brown made her will, she was only 42, and she did it on a lark before an overseas trip. It occurs to me that it wouldn't be a bad idea to have a will, she typed in a letter to her lawyer in May 1952, so that the rapacious state of New York cannot take 1/3 of my horse brasses and Crispian, her Kerry blue terrier. There was real estate, some stock, jewelry, and a Chrysler station wagon. And there were the royalties from her storybooks. She left them for all 79 of her books then in print to the son of a college friend. Albert Clark was 9 at the time. Goodnight Moon was published on September 3rd, 1947 by Harper and Brothers. It cost $1.75 a copy, which would be about $8.50 now, and it sold 6,000 copies that fall. It got generally good reviews, although the children's librarian at the New York Public Library didn't like it and barred its acquisition by any of its branches until 1975. But things happened, and by 1951, sales had fallen to 1,300 copies. It was close to being delisted by Harper, but in March 1953, the book was spotlighted in Child Behavior, a syndicated parental advice newspaper column. It captures the 2-year-old so completely, the authors wrote, that it seems almost unlawful that you can hypnotize a child off to sleep as easily as you can by reading this small classic. Sales rebounded, and by 1955, sales had reached 4,000 copies. On January 15, 1957, when Mr. Clark was 13, the executor of Mrs. Brown's will finished appraising the estimated value of past and future earnings from the rights to the 79 titles she had left him. The total value, in one of the most egregious rounding errors of literary history, was $17,530. The copyright to Goodnight Moon was put down at $500. Brown had been a poor negotiator with publishers. At one point, she had 7 on the trot, turning out the 100 books she wrote before she died. Although she gave some of her earliest stories away for a pittance, she learned as she went and became a tough negotiator, once going so far as to mail her editor a set of dueling pistols. But the auditors and the executors thought altogether, though 17,000 was a lot in the mid-50s, that was all there was, because after all, they were just kids' books. Margaret Brown's will stipulated that young Albert not receive any of the money from her royalties until he turned 21, and the world moved on in the meantime. In 1965, President Johnson launched the Elementary and Secondary Education Act, which allotted nearly $300 million to school libraries over 4 years. Almost immediately, sales of children's books picked up, and in 1966, Harper sold nearly 20,000 copies of Goodnight Moon. A decade later came the 1975 publication of Goodnight Moon in Britain, the first of many foreign printings. 2 years later, the book was introduced in paperback. For the first time, annual sales topped 100,000. By the late 1980s, baby boomers who had grown up with Goodnight Moon were reading it to their own children. And by 1986, sales topped 200,000 copies. The next year, the 40th anniversary of its debut, sales surpassed 2 million. In 1991, Goodnight Moon appeared in the form we see it now, a board book. The new publishing format, thick, glossy cardboard pages impervious to a child's clutch and drool, was an instant hit with both new and replacement buyers. By 2000, the Wall Street Journal reported total sales of the book surpassed 11 million copies, making it one of the best-selling picture books of all time. In 2017, Smithsonian Magazine reported Goodnight Moon had sold more than 48 million copies since being published in 1947. First editions today run in the $1,000 to $2,000 range. Another writer, Katie Roy, tried to capture the wonderful lasting quality of Brown's work, which made Goodnight Moon such a hit. She wrote, "One of Margaret Wise Brown's offhand descriptions of childhood makes me think that she is nearer to childhood than the rest of us, inside it in a way that most of us can't quite imagine or get to." She talks about the, quote, painful, shy animal dignity with which a child stretches to conform to a strange adult social politeness. Could there be a better, more intimate expression of that awkward childhood relation to the adult world? Royce continues, although preternaturally incisive about that, also preternaturally incisive about that stage of life is her statement about the purpose of kids' books. Quote, to jog them with the unexpected and comfort them with the familiar. Putting both the jogging and the comforting together is too resplendent an insight for an expert on childhood and seems to belong instead to a denizen of it. For her part, Brown never quite grew up, though she tried hard. Perhaps like Maurice Sendak, her work reaches children so well because it was so informed by the realities of childhood. I refuse to lie to children, Sendak said for his part. I refuse to cater to the bullshit of innocence. Brown, Royf tells us, did not harbor sentimental notions and was not overly devoted to bunnies and chubby toddlers. In a Life magazine profile, the reporter expressed surprise that the tender creator of so many rabbit-themed books would enjoy hunting and shooting rabbits. And Margaret replied, well, I don't especially like children either, at least not as a group. I won't let anybody get away with anything just because they are little. Movie star attractive, she was in a relationship with another woman author who wrote bad poetry and was 20 years her senior through the 1940s. The woman who wrote as Michael Strange was a former wife of the actor John Barrymore. They met at a party and discovered they were having an affair with the same man. Her personal life may have been a bit of a train wreck, but Brown was a disciplined writer who rented an improbable-looking 1810 farmhouse in Manhattan as her writing factory, and where she also gave dinner parties in a room walled with animal fur. At her home in Maine, she kept her bedroom outdoors, with a table and nightstand and a mirror nailed to a tree, along with an outside well that held butter and eggs. She formed a club called the Bird Brain Society. Its premise was that any member could declare any day of the year to be Christmas, and all the other members had to come over and help celebrate. She was once also the fastest woman alive in the sport of beagling. She traveled constantly and once caused an uproar in a hotel room in Paris when she turned it into an orangery with live birds. Ask her what time it was, and she'd answer, what time would you like it to be? In 1952, Brown was engaged to James Stillman Rockefeller Jr., who was descended from both Rockefellers and Carnegies. He was 16 years her junior and a yachtsman. On a tour of France, she underwent surgery for an appendicitis. To show the doctors her recuperative powers, she did a can-can kick, dislodging a blood clot in her leg. She died in minutes at the age of 42. Brown's genius was to apply concepts of psychology to children's books. At the time, children's literature still consisted largely of fairy tales and fables and moral stories. Brown came to see that preschoolers were primarily interested in their own small worlds, and that fantasy actually confused and alienated them. It is only the blind eye of the adult that finds the familiar uninteresting, she wrote. The attempt to amuse children by presenting them with the strange, the bizarre, the unreal is the unhappy result of this adult blindness. Under a college professor's mentorship, Brown wrote about the familiar, animals, vehicles, bedtime rituals, the sounds of city and country, testing her stories on classrooms of young children. It was important not to talk down to them, she realized, and yet still to speak to them in their own language. That would mean summoning her own keen childlike senses to observe the world as a child does, which is how one chilly November she found herself spending the night in a friend's barn, listening to the rumbling of cows' bellies and the purring of farm cats. Maintaining a childlike perspective was the key to her work, but throughout her life she worried a bit that she had failed to grow up. Even as she approached 40, She was painting glow-in-the-dark stars over her bed in her New York apartment. But like the wandering protagonist of one of her other classics, Home for a Bunny, she often felt out of place. I'm stuck in my childhood, she wrote a friend, and that raises the devil when one wants to move on. The whimsical qualities she interpreted as immaturity appealed to her friends, but it was a constant source of stress in her relationships. Margaret Wise Brown said that in this modern world where activity is stressed almost to the point of mania, quietness as a childhood need is too often overlooked. Yet a child's need for quietness is the same today as it has always been. It may even be greater. For quietness is an essential part of all awareness. In quiet times and sleepy times, a child can dwell in thoughts of his own and in songs and stories of her own. It's a telling point, and in her 1999 Pulitzer Prize-winning play, Wit, which was also made into an HBO movie, Margaret Edson portrays the losing battle of a fearsome, single, middle-aged, familyless college English professor battling cancer. Floating in and out of consciousness in hospital, Vivian Baring retraces a life spent largely frightening students in the study of John Donne and the emulation of her own fearsome mentor, Dr. E.M. Ashford. At the play's end, Dr. Ashford, an 80-year-old visiting family in the city, stops to see her star student in her last hours. When Ashford offers to recite some Donne, and Baring, barely present, declines, the elderly professor climbs into her hospital bed with her and reads her the book she brought to give to a great-grandson at his birthday party, The Runaway Bunny. You can look this up and find the clip on YouTube. As for Brown, she lives on thanks to forgetfulness and a barn. In 1990, author Amy Gary found a trunk filled with over 70 unpublished manuscripts in a barn owned by Roberta Brown's sister. Comprising some 500 pages, this treasure trove has since been cataloged and edited by Gary, who helped publish the stories and even wrote a biography about Brown. Together, these efforts shine a light on an already luminous legacy and ultimately illustrate one of Brown's most famous assertions. Everything that one would ever look for is usually where they find it. Her almost husband, James Rockefeller, married eventually and is now 95. He wrote a preface to that biography of his almost wife and endowed a Hollins College fund that now awards a medal and prize every year to each the best new children's book. Her light shines bigger than ever, he wrote. And as for Albert Clark, the boy who inherited Brown's copyrights, he flashed in the pan of a 2000 Wall Street Journal story, which was nominated for a Pulitzer Prize. Then 57, he was living as a vagrant with 2 children and a gift for wasting money. Having received over $5 million in royalties, he had $27,000 in the bank. Since then, he has dropped out of sight. He and/or his children will continue banking HarperCollins checks from Goodnight Moon until 2043. And so that's the story of Goodnight Moon and its author, Margaret Wise Brown, the worldwide hit that almost wasn't.
An interesting backstory to these authors. I mean, we love their books, but we never know what's going on behind the scenes. Next week, the Edward Bulwer Lytton segment will be back, and the guy who wrote those famous words, "It was a dark and stormy night," and the story behind other things that he wrote. Well, that's about it. Lee, are you still with us?
I am.
Hey,
Yeah,
Lee.
I'm here.
All right.
I'm sorry we didn't get to Bulwer Lytton. I read The Last Days of Pompeii when I was in high school and was absolutely fascinated by it. And at that time, I didn't know about A Dark and Stormy Night, but I love that book. Love that book, and it inspired me to read more about Pompeii. So I'm looking forward to that segment from Lynn next week. And
Yeah,
I'll
he
have
does.
to be thinking about what to do next for me.
He is so well researched. Well, I've
He
noticed
is.
since I've been on the show for the last couple of months, whenever we have a bookbinder on, our attendance just skyrockets. And next week, we not only have a bookbinder, but a book artist. Her name is Gabby Cooksey, a young lady from Washington State. And I would encourage you, Lee, to look up her website before the show next week. It's called Bound by Cooksey, Cooksey. She is an absolute artist. And, you know, about a month ago, we had Carrie Miki Lani Schroeder on the show from San Antonio, Texas. And she was promoting her online seminar on book art, which our contributor, Mary Kay Watson, attended. And Mary Kay is so excited about it. She's going to tell us how that class went and show us a few of the things that she made in that class. We've also got our cafe regular Eddie Nix from Driftless Books and Music, way out there in the hills of Baroque, Wisconsin. He'll be back with us again, and we're looking forward to having you with another great subject, Lee, as well. Okay, folks, that's about it. That's all we have time for this week, and we probably even have a little less time than that. So we're going to say goodbye, sayonara, ciao, see you later. The Rare Book Cafe, where the topics are priceless and the conversation is free.